candid conversations, unfiltered opinions, and humor with AVP60 podcast.
Hello, all. Today I have the pleasure of having this conversation with Dan Friker. Dan is the Chief Revenue Officer for Women Impact Tech. He has a wealth of experience with HR, staffing, you name it. And a lot of those experiences, including past and present, we're going to have a conversation about on today's episode and how we can really make impacts where we are. It doesn't matter where you are in this beautiful globe of ours. So, Dan, we're really excited to get into this conversation about your experiences. So, can you give us a little origin story about Mr. Fricker?
I'm originally from the northern area of Chicago. Both my parents were school teachers. My grandparents were school teachers. I left the state of Illinois to attend the University of Minnesota, where only my career in hindsight seems to make sense. Graduated with a degree in accounting with a minor in German. I was an exchange student my third year of college, so I got a chance to actually live amongst the Europeans. But it was pretty quick after that that I found myself, of all places, in the staffing industry.
Okay.
So I started really building my skill set with a company called Manpower Group, which is actually one of the largest global HR services staffing companies in the world. So really started off as an individual contributor within sales. And then about, 10 years in, I had the opportunity of joining the national team. So what that means is I started working with some pretty large companies, Fortune 200, Fortune 500 type of companies. Ultimately was promoted to become a vice president and then a vice president general manager, where I was managing a global portfolio of about $300 million, really amongst some very large companies, including ExxonMobil, Cisco, Microsoft, just to name a few. And that really enabled me to travel the world, see how other people in different places found work, and had the ability to really help a lot of these customers find great talent. Went back to graduate school, got a master's degree in HR analytics, so human resources and industrial relations, from the Carlson School of Management at the University of Minnesota. For the last 7 years, I actually sit on one of their career advisory boards within the College of Science and Engineering, really helping students with bachelor's, master's, and PhD improve their probability of finding meaningful work. So it is a passion of mine. I've picked up my fourth certification in AI as well. I think we continue to see AI transform all aspects of life, but in particular, I have a front row seat in terms of how it's actually transforming, not just in terms of how companies identify and find talent and even deploy that talent, but then even as job seekers. If you're looking for a job, you've probably have had some interesting, difficult, frustrating experiences. And a lot of that is because of changes that are going on behind the scenes. So that's a little bit about me, my origin story, and what brought me here today.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. It is very beautiful to see how, your career changed from even your decision on where to go to school and also ending up in Germany and coming out and working for Manpower, which Manpower is pretty well known globally for talent. So with your work at Manpower and what you're doing in academia today, I don't want to say people on the same level because it is a little different. Basically, people on the precipice of starting out a career, whether it's skilled or it is formal education driven. What are the similarities that you can draw between Manpower, entry level type of work and beyond, and then students coming out into the workforce depending on their area of studies?
So if I may ask a clarifying question,
Sure.
right? So are you asking questions along, like, what are those challenges that maybe a new student, maybe out of high school, and then a new student coming out of the bachelor's program and master's program, like, are there similarities and differences between those students?
What are the commonalities that you see? We're going to talk about the commonalities
Yeah,
in similarities, and also we'll talk about the differences because they do share similarities and also
correct.
differences, right?
So I think the first similarity that I see amongst, new workers. And I'm talking about, people in their teens all the way up to, people that are kind of senior level, career individuals. You know, what's so interesting, very few people are good at articulating how they're uh, how their schooling and whatever discipline that might be, how that actually translates into how and why you are going to be a good worker for a particular company. Within the College of Science and Engineering, one of the things we do at board meetings is that we get together with, bachelor's, master's, PhD students, some of the brightest people you've ever seen. Right? And they can tell you in intricate detail about the research, the things that they've done. And then when I ask them about, okay, how can you apply those skills to a 3M? And they have no idea what I'm talking about. They have no idea about basics. How do you write a resume? How do you do an interview? How do you talk about yourself? As a matter of fact, it's probably the number one question that I typically ask people, which is, do you ever just kind of just take an hour, take an arbitrary number, 30 minutes, and just really kind of think about where are you today in your life, in your career, and where would you like to be a year from now? What kind of job do you want to have? And then think through, all right, if I want to get that position, what are those knowledge, skills, and abilities that you have to attain to get you to that next level? And I think I'm no longer stunned to see people across age groups. They just don't do it. It's the exception, not the rule. And because if you don't know where you're going on a journey, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but you do have to kind of really think about, again, where you want to be, and then what do you need to do? You can't just like wake up each day going, what am I going to do today? You can, but when you really talk about serious changes, then if you don't understand that about yourself, then how would you ever recognize those opportunities to do meaningful work? And I think that is probably the number one similarity, is really in those type of soft skills to be able to really engage and to share with someone as they go through the interview process. And I would say though, the interview process itself, for a variety of reasons, because of AI, because of the economy, there's all these two kind of different
Right.
factors. I think you also see how that is changing for different groups with different, within different ages. And what I mean by that is younger students typically, not always, are more tech savvy. They're much more comfortable applying for jobs on smart devices, accepting jobs on smart devices, right? And if you take that to older generational workers, they can't even conceive, like, would I ever accept a job on my iPhone or whatever? Yeah, that is a thing. It happens every day to thousands, if not millions of people around the world. So getting people that kind of, again, on average, who have different challenges based on different groups. And I think you just have to kind of work with them to kind of find that happy medium.
Mhm.
Older workers will do a much better job understanding what a business environment is like. I see that as a big problem, with younger workers, like even the basics of what do you wear for an interview? How do you show up in a business environment? What is appropriate and not, like, what are those type of boundaries and everything else? Some people refer to that as kind of common sense type of information. But I would also say the one trend, and this is not a good trend, that you've seen over the last several decades, companies are not investing in their workers at the same level from a training perspective than what they've done 10 years ago and 20 years ago. And their rationale is that an average worker in the United States today only spends about 2.7 years on a job. The mentality is, why would we invest a lot of this time, money, and effort in training individuals when they're going to up and leave? Now, to me, that also smells and feels a little bit like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because if you're not being invested in, if they're not training you or developing you, what are you likely to do? You're likely to leave that job to get you those knowledge, skills, experiences so you can take it to the next level. And especially in difficult economic times, training programs are almost always the first to get cut. It feels like an easy thing just to kind of scratch off the list. And in the short term, maybe that's okay, but it can have huge implications to your workforce, your talent, motivation, and I would actually argue your company's competitive advantage.
Yeah, absolutely agree. So with the training, that this is with the teacher in me. I have a question loading. With the training bit, I think sometimes companies get short sighted into addressing the revolving door
Yes.
that, comes with, turnover, that they don't see the investment, the upfront investment that they're making to get people in the door. It's the old saying, it's cheaper to keep her, is it cheaper to keep them? It will be cheaper to train an employee who's already invested and working for your company than to try to, entice somebody from outside to come in. It turns into this filling the basket analogy.
Mhm.
And where do you think companies lose sight of the revenue it takes to bring in new talent as opposed to maintaining the talent that they have in-house?
So I think you have to acknowledge a couple of things that are happening in the business environment today. So there are things that used to be really strongly correlated, and that those correlations are no longer predicting outcomes like they used to. I'll give you an example. So just a couple of weeks ago, maybe about a month ago, you had a lot of, for example, the Silicon Valley companies, so like Microsoft. I
Mm.
actually really love Microsoft. And their CEO, Satya Nadella, is amazing. Definitely one of the top five coolest CEOs. But Microsoft just had one of the best earnings. They've earned incredible profits over the last quarter. In fact, one could argue over the last year, historic levels. And yet they announced a 7% workforce reduction. Typically, what you would see is if a company's earnings were going up, what you typically saw very closely related to that is that they would hire more people. They would
Right.
train more people. They would develop more people. Now you're seeing, a number of companies talk about record profits, but they're not hiring. And there's several factors for this. I'm actually going to give a little bit of an explanation from the business community side. Because of AI and because of the advancements in a lot of these new technologies, one of the things that I don't think companies are doing a good enough job is to really ask the questions, okay, what are the skills are we going to need in the next 6 months, in the next year? So I don't care if you're hiring a nurse. I don't care if you're hiring an accountant. I don't care if you're hiring someone in marketing. You might have great experiences. You've gone to great schools and maybe even got, a number of certifications. But I think what you're seeing, especially with AI, is the job that you probably got trained to do, frankly, as recently as a year ago, is likely not going to be performed in the same way in the next year. And I would say almost certainly in the next 2 years. So if you don't know what kind of skills you as a company are going to need, then how are you going to find it on the marketplace? How are you going to train for it? And I'm actually, doing this call at a conference right now in Las Vegas, meeting with a lot of great companies. And I'm telling you that problem that I just discussed, the mismatch of what are the skills that they have internally versus what are the new skills that they're going to need. Frankly, I see the problem actually just getting worse before it gets better
Oh,
as we move into 2026. So then to go back to your first comment, then what do you tell students? And I think if I had to offer a quick explanation is I think you have to instill a couple of things, adaptability and resilience. And those, I think, sometimes can be construed as opposites. But if they're not adapting how whatever training that they just had in school into this new business world, because if they don't understand kind of the core fundamentals, if they're not constantly looking at how can I do this job better using these new tools and technologies, then the implications are that you might not be relevant in your job at the same levels. And I think we could get into a pretty long debate though, then where does that responsibility fall to? Does it fall to the companies that they need to tell their workers? Is it, the individual that has to take ownership of where do they want to go? What do they want to become? And I think maybe the answer is a little bit of both, but it's a difficult conundrum that is playing out in real time.
yeah. So with the adaptability and the resilience statement, I see that working effectively for older students, the career pivoters of the world and things. So the new age of students and workforce, resilience and adaptability is not an easy sell because the new generation, delayed gratification is not the name of the game. It is very much here and now. So how do we sell that have to be resilient. Okay. Adaptable, maybe, but resilient. The new generation of workers do not have time to sit and wait for something to happen. If it's not happening here and now, I'm going to jump to the next company. I'll go to the next company. Maybe that's why we're seeing like a shorter lifespan of workers, or a shorter lifespan of 10 years coming to mind, or years of investment with an employer. So how do we sell that to the new generation of workers? Because we have to be honest with ourselves. We're no longer in the generation where people were married to their jobs 10, 15, 20, 30, 50, 60 years in one employment, and sometimes one position, same position.
I might challenge you on this one.
Okay.
At our last board meeting at the University of Minnesota, I can quantify my loyalty to the University of Minnesota based on the accumulation of tuition that I paid for my bachelor's and master's.
Yeah.
I'm in a room with deans, with professors, and the topic of AI came up, especially within the College of Science and Engineering. And it hit so fast, and you could not get people to agree in the room. So, for example, you had the astrophysics department basically say AI is enabling, like the students were doing it already, right? They were using AI to essentially code. They want to be astrophysicists. They don't want to be coders. And so you literally had the dean talk about, I don't care if they're using AI to write code. And then you had the computer science department say, well, we do, right? And so there was not agreement. In fact, I would actually argue very few universities right now actually have agreement on what is acceptable uses for AI.
True.
And that's because the students are essentially schooling the teachers, right? They're bringing those toolboxes. I mean, I say boxes because literally by the time this, podcast comes out, there's probably going to be new tools. They're bringing that to the table. But I think the other important thing, as older workers, is that how do you then change, again, the way that you're going to teach based on these new tools, based on what your students already know and you don't, right? How is that going to transform a process, right? I mean, I can give you so many examples of how quickly AI is making some roles obsolete, right? So, for example, if you're a photographer, right, and you were doing photo shoots, like good example would be like, North Face, like, ski, like if you didn't get, you paid all the time, money, expense to fly people to the side of a mountain, to take pictures. And suddenly someone's like, I don't want the red jacket. I want the black jacket. Now with AI, you can fix it like that.
That's right.
And so if you're a photographer, they call MarTech, marketing technology, like it is completely changing. This morning I was reading an article about people are using AI in the United States to write better letters to their healthcare companies because they're seeking a certain treatment and they get rejected. And so they're using AI and AI tools to basically say, and so they're using that to actually fight and win against insurance companies, right? So in a weird way, it is kind of leveling the playing field. It's democratizing the opportunity. And I will say it's also one of the few things. So, it's just an interesting comment to think about. Globally, we're going through this experience. So we can have this conversation in Germany, you can have it in the UK, you can have it in Singapore, same problem, right? You can talk about, this in terms of age. Like we're all going through this shared experience. And I think younger students typically, on average, are better at adapting. Part of it is because they don't know, right? Versus older generational workers that are like, this is the way we used to do it.
I agree with you on that, the adaptability, the resilience part now. And, that conversation, that comment about universities, I teach as well, not having an agreement on the use of AI tool is very true. And again, it leans into this is the way we've always done things. This is how you learn nursing. It's really practical. You have to put your fingers on it. You're dealing with people. Yes, you're dealing with people's lives. However, if I can guide my students to utilize AI tools to be better researchers, if I can guide them to be better at case studies, right? If I can guide them to be well-rounded when it comes to cultural sensitivity, as opposed to relying on the packet, the 3-page packets that I hand to them in the classroom, I would be a much better nursing professor. That's in my assessment. There are a lot of colleagues of mine that would disagree. If my students can effectively write a paper, not having AI, do majority of it, if you can effectively write a paper that is sound, that you can present and sound like a subject matter expert, right? As opposed to burdening you, knowing that you have 3 quizzes coming up, you have another test coming up before the finals, you have dosage calculation tests, you have clinical packets to submit, you have a care plan to do, you have clinical on top of that, and you're a mother and you have a job, right? As opposed to you spending 5 days trying to figure out this paper. If you can use your knowledge and come up
Yes.
with a solid paper and present it to me and sound like a subject matter expert, and I can rapid fire questions and you can happily answer them, I think half of the journey is accomplished. However, not a lot of my colleagues who have been doing this for years and years agree with that, because that is not the way we've done things.
Correct.
So
I
they hang on.
I also think, well, I can speak to the University of Minnesota, so I don't want to say this is true across every university. I guess I'm proud of the fact that at least the University of Minnesota acknowledged, if parents or if people in general are going to spend a lot of money going to an institution, as a parent myself, you're hoping to get a great outcome, from that graduate. But I've also encountered, I'm not naming names, there are certain professors that are saying it is my job to teach the curriculum, or to do research and teach, and that sort of thing. It is not my job to help a student find a job. Then I've had other professors that are like, if students don't find jobs, then why are they coming here?
Exactly.
So I don't even think, if we had 100 or 10 professors in a room, I don't even think we can get agreement on that. Your experience is very similar to my experience. And I think my best way to address that in a world of AI, I think an AI can help do a lot of things in a lot of great ways. You gave some great examples there, but it shouldn't replace empathy. And I think we have an opportunity to take a very powerful tool, but I think the humans need to insert the human process and that human connection.
Oversight. Completely agree. AI tools, people utilize them by just letting them run. I don't believe AI tools, like any tool in the world, was meant to just operate on its own. It needs a degree of human
Correct.
insight and guidance. That is why we prompt. That is why we customize bots. That's why we do all these different things. It wasn't meant to completely replace human being. However, a human can provide that oversight, which speaks to your point on adaptability. So you have to be adaptable in how do I utilize this tool to be effective in my role as a photographer, as opposed to spending 15 hours editing this shoot that did 3 hours ago, and I have over 300 photos to edit. I can utilize tools within Photoshop. I can utilize tools within whatever photo editing app or video editing app. We even have video editing in our fingertips. You think about all the influencers. They make a cut, and by the time they publish it, is beautiful and polished. So we can utilize it. I think with academia, we just have to, I think everybody wants a guardrail, to be honest with you. I think everybody wants a guardrail. Everybody wants a guardrail that makes sense. That is
Yeah.
why we kind of like, we have this back and forth with one another, and we don't have like an agreement. And the same thing is happening in healthcare too. The same thing is
Yeah.
happening in medicine, because medicine is very sensitive, and we're working tirelessly to put in those guardrails so we can lean into utilizing AI in healthcare in a way that it benefits the population that we serve. So we've talked about AI and academia. There's a point that you made about even dressing or showing up for job interviews and presenting a certain way for the new age of workforce. I get you talked about the employer's side of not wanting to invest because of the lifespan of employee and an employment is about 2.7. And where do we have that influence as a society, as a community, and also as a school? So a young boy or girl, high schooler, who is going into this young adulthood or new relationship with getting an employment is looking for guidance. We have
Mhm.
guidance counselors. Have we made school too academic and taken out the soft side of things? That the kids, even if they're not learning at home, they're looking for a mentor, somebody to teach them. Teachers used to help knot ties, make sure the shirts were straight, the slacks were ironed. Where did we drop the ball? Are we too casual now?
It's actually a fantastic question because I have like five thoughts that just popped in my head because I think you bring up several points. When I started at Manpower Group in 2002, 2003, sounds right.
Mm,
The expectation is suits, ties, and part of that is not just in terms of what that office culture looked like, but also the people that I was meeting were also wearing shirts, ties. But I think even before that, 2002, 2003, like you really started to see, I'm actually going to use the word de-evolution, not just in terms of what people are wearing, but how they were conducting themselves. So you talked about guardrails. I'm sorry for all my friends at ExxonMobil. I do love them as well. But like even different buildings have different cultures. So they have a corporate office in Irving, Texas, and your expectation is that even today that you're wearing kind of like the formal attire and everything else. And there are other offices in which you had business attire. So even in the same company, even in the same state, to be separated, let's see, Irving to Houston, 3 hours? Sounds right. Like just even a couple of, like even having those kind of different things. So you bring up going, okay, if a company doesn't have a single culture, what are you going to tell students? What I try to instill with university students, because again, I'm coming at it with part of my job is being a part of this advisory board is to advise, to really work with the Office of Admissions and other department groups to say, like, we have to do a better job at least creating. I grew up at a time where, you have cliff notes. If you didn't want to read the whole Shakespeare play and you want to get the main points, everything else, like, can we give and do a better job with cliff notes to students? And I'm going to go back to that theme of resilience, which is as a teacher, as a parent, how do you teach and embrace rejection? Because the job search is going to be rejection. Even when you get the job, how do you take that feedback to make better corrections about yourself? And those corrections could be based on your technical skills and aptitude, or it could be your social skills. How are you embracing other people? I guess I'm actually curious to ask you a question because one of the things that the University of Minnesota's been looking at, and you can now see it in the data, you are seeing the generation that went through lockdown, and lockdown impacted students differently based on actually several different factors, but based on their age when they were going to school, and you're seeing that generation now graduating, not just with bachelor's, but, advanced degrees as well. And you can see that they don't have necessarily the same level on average social skills because of what they endured at a different time and place. And you're going to unfortunately see that kind of generation continue to kind of work their way up. And again, as teachers, as kind of public private organizations, what do we do to kind of improve those outcomes? And it takes a coalition of the willing to kind of, well, first way of solving a problem, admit you have a problem, and then let's kind of, kind of go through that. Are you seeing that as well, with your university? Like you see those students and you can even see even just 2 or 3 years, the students behind them don't have the same level of problems.
Yeah. It is something that is very observable and is something that I feel like people approach with caution because of the sensitivity of it. I had a conversation with a director of nursing at one of the facilities that I take my students, and this conversation came up. And while she was talking about something that she just experienced with one of the workers, which incidentally was a student of the school, and um, she's like, I don't understand why a person would think that way. I said, a person? Are you noticing it in one of what more than one person? And she stopped and said, oh my God, you're right. And I said, it is a generational thing. And unfortunately, the people within this block are affected by that. So a quick example, young lady, nursing student, she's already working as an LPN. She was working an overnight shift and she was at the desk studying. on a subacute unit where we have people that just came from the hospital. So nobody was rounding and somebody else was sleeping. And the director of nurses, I don't think they were expecting her to be there. And she's like, why is it so quiet that nobody's walking around? And she's like, well, I'm studying. And she about lost it. She's like, that is your problem to do, not at work. And the thing is the tiptoeing and correcting, because again, the same generation that unfortunately was stuck behind a computer screen learning critical skills in their pajamas are not going to feel the importance of dressing up to go to an office building. So if I was halfway in bed, snuggling my pillow in a lecture hall, I'm not going to feel the need to present a certain way to go to an interview. If I show up in a t-shirt and a khaki shorts or trousers, it should be fine. You should be able to take it, and that's your problem. I don't care if my t-shirt is ironed or not, right? So it's just that degree of empathy, which you mentioned, right? A degree of empathy, but also having a culture. Also being able to instill that, hey, you want to present this way. Yes, you're comfortable with this environment right now. However, this is not the only interaction that you will have in the world. You will have interactions with other people, and you want to present well. This is not to please anybody, because at the end of the day, sometimes it turns into, well, you have to accept her for how I present. Baby love, it's not about that. It's not about really you. We have to have a culture that we can instill certain things in our employees or students without completely frazzling them. You had empathy of understanding that they learned and trained as still living from a time where the comforts were all they knew for a very long time. Let's be honest, there are a lot of people that went remote work and they were actively guzzling the happy juice while on the job. And those are people that is like, okay, I kind of like miss those times if they want to be honest with themselves. So it goes back to empathy. It goes back to understanding that whatever was done, however, for the safety of everybody or whatever, there's a lot of unlearning that needs to
Right.
happen along. And most young adults in the workspace or the workforce do not have a role model of sorts. Some of them are the first generation college graduate of the family. Yes, it's
Yes.
2025. Yes, it still happens. First generation, some of them do not have a good compass to direct them. But we can have that investment, whether it's a manager or one person dedicated to be a cultural whatever of the company or of the team, to say, hey, I know you're comfortable, however, show up this way. Even with hygiene, we have people who show up days of not seeing water or touching water. So what should we do? Allow those people to just have a bad body odor without addressing it in a way that is appropriate, so that it can boost their self-esteem and also help them within forming that interpersonal relationship within their team members. So I think it's about approaching it the right way and with empathy.
I have to admit, you reminded me of actually a real and funny story, and that involves guardrails, healthcare, and a business environment. For your listeners, some of the best stories you can ever get in your life is to talk to someone in HR over a glass of wine. You will hear amazingly awesome stories. And no, I'm not going to say the name of the company, but let's just say this person's a good friend of mine.
Right.
And their company is done a lot with telemedicine. So instead of actually going to a clinic or whatever, you can now just have an LPN or a nurse or whatever kind of walk through. And there was a complaint because this younger employee decided to do a telemedicine appointment at their desk, to which whatever ailment it was, the person took their shirt off. Now, again, yes, it's appropriate if you're meeting with a medical professional to do it,
Right.
but you shouldn't be doing that in the office when other people are like, why is this person taking their shirt off in front of the camera? And she's like, so I have to write a policy to make sure if you're going to do a telemedicine appointment in the office, to do it in a confined space where no one can see you. And of course, she's saying this over a glass of wine to say, I actually have to write a policy to tell people about guardrails in the office. And again, that's the great thing about human beings. Like, you kind of can't make it up.
Yeah.
So I was thinking of like, wow, that involves guardrails, educated in new workforce, healthcare.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we all just have to adjust to it.
We have to. And in healthcare, it's so funny because, this is why I tell my students once they get into med surg or Jerry, and our first week, which is orientation and different things for the ones that are either new to nursing or are career pivoting. The LPNs are kind of like used to this already. I'm like, hey, you're in the era of your life that family members walk up to you and pop out body parts. You are about to know your family members in ways in which you didn't. So that uncle of yours would just open the shorts one day and say, bend over and say, take a look at this. That's because they trust you. That's because you're not doing this for yourself. You're literally doing this for your community, for your family, and for everybody around you. So that sounds funny. It sounds hilarious. It sounds silly. However, if my student is at, a family reunion and an aunt comes and pops out a boob, they're like, you know what? That crazy professor of mine talked about is like, okay, you might want to see a doctor for that.
Yeah.
Talking about guardrails, that is personal guardrails. However, you can say, you know what, auntie, can we go to the bathroom and take a look at that? Let's not just do it out here. I may be a nurse, but I don't think everybody else is a nurse. If we can have that within our family close relationships, we can have that in the workplace. And unfortunately, things like this always occur. And it's almost like it puts us in a reactory position as opposed to a proactive. So we have to react to put the guardrails in place because we feel like, okay, everybody should know that assumption, that common sense assumption. But no, everybody doesn't know. Everybody doesn't have the same foundation that you have. Everybody doesn't have the same support that you have or some experiences that you have. And most of all, we are so multi-generational in the workforce that things that you grew up with may have not been things I grew up with, and vice versa, my students. So I have to say those things that seem obvious, but I know they're not obvious. So if it's obvious to you, great. If it's not obvious to you, I cannot begin to tell you how many times I've said something in the class and someone's like, wait, professor, what is that? And the rest of the class is like, wait, what? Are you serious? So again, they don't know. I have to explain it, right? So I think it's just that investment in people, no matter how short their tenure is at your company, I think is wise. That's my input.
So in the parlance of, I guess, my world,
Yeah.
one of the things that would fall into the category of a realistic job preview. And one of the things that I would again have to applaud the University of Minnesota and the work that we've done over the years of the Career Advisory Board is actually taking bachelor's, master's, PhD students to visit certain companies. So I'm proud to say like certain companies like Medtronic, EM, Seagate, where you actually take these students and they meet with department heads. It could be an R&D center, it could be engineering, it could be, but they're actually able to see and experience and engage what a day in the life of that individual goes through. Like you can show them pictures, you can read them books, but there is something, again, it's that human connection, that kind of weird human magic that happens when you're now on site at and you're meeting the research group and you're understanding how their lab works and how that, interactivity works. And I think a good professor or professors will try to give them all these little tips and tricks, but it's until they kind of experience it, it all starts to snap together. And that I think the more, to me, that's a good example of how do we actually start to address the problem? Like, what do we need to do more of that could help these students, and regardless of what age they are? Because I think it's applicable across that career path. And I think if they start to see it in the experience, then they start going, okay, this is why I can't wear pajamas to work. As ridiculous as that sounds,
Right.
that's a real problem.
It is.
And like every company is going to have their own unique culture, but there's some commonalities, some social norms. I think one of the most difficult skills, regardless of your cognitive abilities, is you're going to have to work with teams. So how do you collectively work together for some type of desired outcome? And I think for some students, they have all of God's given gifts to be able to do the job. But again, it can be that social piece of working as a team, not as a individual contributor. Now there are roles for that, I mean, there are researchers that would love to be able to walk into a lab and walk out and never have to people.
Right.
But I would say for the vast majority of other workers, there is that interconnectivity that has to happen.
Like, those are my kind of people, the people that don't people. They're good at what they do. That's it. So I completely agree with you. Real world experience and having to feel the energy of a place is the best teacher. And most times the students don't things don't click until they're actually physically in environments that they see themselves working in. So talking about things clicking, something that you mentioned earlier is students can tell you all they can about something. However, if you ask them, so how would this be put into practice at 3 a.m. and they fall apart, right? So the one thing that I see is common in the American culture, I want to speak of the American culture that I have observed is, the need to be kind of, not be braggadocious or talk about yourself. And even when somebody talks about the accomplishments and they have to, a little humble brag, right? So do you feel like that culture, has an effect on, being able to apply knowledge to this is how I can show up in the workplace, or this is how I can show up and bring a difference. And how has that differs? Because you've experienced South Asia. Do you
Right.
feel the same also applies in the South Asian culture, or
Mhm.
I move forward to about talking about the abilities?
So when I was in graduate school, and again, this was maybe just a point in time at the Carlson School of Management at the University of Minnesota, it was about 60%, 40% of the students were Asian culture. I would say of that 40% population, and I know this number has since shifted, by the way, but about three quarters were from China. Then the next biggest one was India. Then we had a spattering of Japanese, Malaysian. And one of the most common things in US business culture is something called a 360 review, where you're getting feedback from your boss, you're getting feedback from people below you. It's fully a circle. And I'll never forget a good chunk of the Asian students were like, yeah, that would never work in Asia. Like you would never say something disparaging to your boss.
Yeah.
Watching them react to it was actually it was a great, fascinating conversation to have with the other students in the room, which is kind of like, okay. And I worked for an Asian company to really understand how does one maintain a trust level? How does one lose that trust? Because if you break some of those norms, it might be impossible for you to get that back. And so, as American students, what I try to articulate for them and to geek out on you, I mean, Francis Fukuyama wrote a great book called Trust, in which he quantified this out. He was a researcher originally with IBM, where each chapter is a country. And he kind of talked about, again, how do you gain trust? How do you lose trust? And it's a great book. It's a fascinating book. And it's taken from a macroeconomic perspective. So and again, all things being equal. And what I try to articulate to students is that's great that you can articulate your strengths and weaknesses, but it really needs to come down to the power of listening and understanding others. Like you can brag all you want, you could talk about, but to really be a good worker inside of a larger ecosystem, and that ecosystem could be a hospital or it could be a corporation, is how do you recognize and engage others to, again, have a desired effect? And I think sometimes with some Americans that might be a little bit very forthcoming with their, abilities and everything else. It's how do you get them to kind of maybe take a step back and to kind of see how are others perceiving you,
Okay.
and are you really getting the desired outcome you want? Because maybe you're not allowing other people to connect or to talk or to listen. Those, by the way, it's probably one of the most common corrections that I'll give employees or students is to frankly just do a better job listening. Which, coming from me, since I've been on your podcast, this is something I personally have because I'm quite loquacious. I like to talk. I like to engage with people. And I've had to work very hard throughout my life and my career to do a better job to listen.
You did a great job listening because I think I've talked the most discussing with you. I really usually just let my guest have the floor, but we got into very interesting conversations about our students. I'm very passionate about my students. I love them all and I want them to succeed. But I'm also empathetic, understanding that generationally we're different. And I come from that aspect. I don't beat them over the head with expectation or what I'm used to generationally. But, with love and empathy, I'm able to kind of like, okay, knock it off. And we kind of like have that kind of a conversation like that let's not repeat that again because yes, you may have been right, the reaction, but however, this is your life. For my students, most of them have graduated now. We had a conversation where uh a faculty chair came into the room. They were about to take an exam, and she said something, and I think it was something religious that set some of the students off. And she didn't mean it in malice. However, it was an innocent statement made. And some of the students got really upset and they got mouthy and whatever. And when she left the room, I closed the door and I had a very heart to heart conversation with them. And it wasn't a soft conversation. It was, let me say something that was not unacceptable. And I said, your reaction, if you continue, you stand to lose in life. You stand to lose here in this campus. You stand to lose. So my nickname for that group of students became "You Stand to Lose." Whenever they see me, Professor, you stand to lose. We're keeping that in mind, and most of them were successful. They graduated because there's no benefit to you arguing with your faculty chair. That's my faculty chair. If I report to my faculty chair, you're my student, you arguing is going to bring what exactly? If you're upset about something, talk about it, ask for a meeting, approach things a different way. So when we talk about students, I get sappy because I understand that generationally we're different. However, we all want the same thing for them. We want them to be successful in the world. And we also want to teach. I teach in a way that my students understand, not the way that I understand. What don't you understand so I can meet you there? I want to meet you there. And what don't I get? Let me know. So I can bring myself to meet you wherever you are so we can go on this journey together. So I've spoken the most I have on any of my podcasts. You can go back and look at it on this one. And you did great listening, Dan. So thank you for that. We've been talking for a while. We talked about this and I want to touch on it before we round up. Right? When it comes to employment, a trend that I've noticed, and when I brought it up to you before we started recording, you agree with me. With the state of the country right now, the economy and everything, people are losing their jobs. Companies are choosing not to hire. Like you mentioned, Microsoft, cutting 7% of its workforce. Whether it's AI, whether it's economy, whether it's anything, most companies are choosing to hire fractional staff. And you expand on what fractional is for those people that don't understand. They're bringing on fractional talent, not staff, fractional talent, as opposed to hiring full-time employees. Can you talk of that shift, being that you're in HR and you understand that dynamic?
Yeah. And I think I want to go backwards before we go forwards.
Okay.
In the United States, going back to like 2000, on average, about 3% of a company's workforce would categorize as non-employee. So 3% could include interns, it could be a contract worker, that sort of thing. And in the United States, although this applies, frankly, to a lot of other countries as well,
Right.
the process of hiring and firing someone is actually more difficult than it sounds. And there's a lot of cost, there's a lot of tax, there's a lot of implications on a bad hire. So if you were to plot on a graph of where now you see a typical company, it's now in the low 30s, so 32, 33% of a company's workforce are non-employees, right? We have developed in the United States, although this is again applicable to a lot of other countries, the ability to bring in talent and skills into the company in a different way than a typical salaried full-time employee. Right? So now we've gone from 3%, 32, 33%. So not a third of your company that are helping you achieve whatever type of corporate mission or whatever objective you want to do. They're not your full-time folks. And again, that could be a combination of workers, contingent workers, part-time workers. And by the way, we're talking about the United States, but you have other countries like France and Italy, they're in the high 40s
Wow.
for that exact reason of how expensive it is to hire someone and fire someone and everything else. So imagine a world where half your or more, I mean, if you look at keep the trend lines going, well to 20, 30, it's okay. We need someone to improve our sales strategy, or we need someone to improve our marketing strategy, or maybe we need either a technical or functional expert in AI to kind of reconfigure our process around whatever.
Right.
Instead of creating a full-time job with a salary, now you have much more of a vehicle for people to provide those services into companies. Their entire platforms. I mean, your smart device. I mean, there's all sorts of type of tools out there today that can enable a person to deliver those skills to a company in either some kind of project base, if you will. If you're talking about it like a photographer, like I need, uh, these images to be, made and formatted and sent back to us, and we're going to pay you a flat fee or an hourly wage. Like, so now there's all sorts of ways for companies to bring talent into their company. But I also think, and frankly, I think of my father. My father has a doctorate, had been in education for many years. He retired for, I think, all of 6 months. And then he became, frankly, a gig worker. So the state of Illinois, like he ended up going back and he taught some classes and was a professor briefly at Northwestern. He provided some consulting services to Mario Andretti Racing. So here was a person that, obviously had garnered a fair amount of academic achievement within his respective field. And yeah, but still wanted to do work. Where it did because he legitimately gets fulfillment of what he does. And I have an uncle who's a partner in a law firm in the city of Chicago, and um, he still provides legal services because it is engaging for him. So that's on one end of the spectrum. And then what I find amazing about younger workers is that they're almost creating their own category of type of services that they can provide. There's one I can think of right off the top of my head who is probably one of the best prompt engineers that I have ever seen. And I asked him, I'm like, oh, you should sell your services. He's like, yeah, I have 10 customers that all I do is prompt engineering work for them. And I'm like, there you go. That's it. Like, that is a thing. Like, don't you want to work full time? He's, no, why?
No.
So I think the fact that you have so many modalities
Yeah.
of, again, getting compensated, getting brought into a particular company, and again, from a positive perspective, it could really help an individual kind of maximize their utility. Like, really, if you're really passionate about doing certain type of work and that's all you want to do, I mean, listen, hopefully this is not news to any of your viewers. Not every aspect of every job is enjoyable. So if you could just
Cat's out of
focus
the
on the,
bag.
yeah, exactly, reports, employee reviews, awesome. So, but if you could daisy chain a career where you're just doing the things that you absolutely love and you're getting paid and you're getting the kind of fulfillment, like that's a good thing. So I would say the rise of, I think the word fractional or fractional employment, I think people have done a better job kind of calling it what it is, or maybe it's a good marketing term, but I
Yes.
would actually argue it's been around in some way, shape, or form now for several decades. And I think it's become more acceptable in the business world. And by the way, not just with big companies, but even small companies. And I have a lot of AI examples there that it's just becoming more commonplace. And so there's no reason to think that either A, going to stop or fundamentally change. I think you're just going to see more and more. As a matter of fact, I mean, McKinsey published a report last summer and they were talking about McKinsey is sometimes known for throwing out like huge proclamations into the future. And they were saying by 2030, you can have your first $1 trillion valued company with just one employee, the founder, because they're envisioning a world in which 99% of a company's workers are fractional or whatever. That is, I think that's on the other end of the spectrum. And perhaps the truth will be somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
But that's maybe a little bit of an idea of like maybe where things are going or they could go.
Yeah.
Uh,
I
but
think
I got to tell you, I wouldn't be surprised.
you're right. Things are rapidly going that direction. There's been a lot of cuts and things of that nature. However, fractional part-time freelancers, contract workers that are being used to fulfill certain aspects of the roles being cut. So we are very fashionable beings, humans. So we are going to take things, rinse it off, put a different lip gloss on it and call it something else. So it's been around for a while, but the name is fractional. That's where we're going. So, Dan, we have been talking for quite a while and we've hit everything from academia to generational workforce to fractional. The one thing you've left a lot. So, please, before we close out this conversation, I want people to be able to find you, whether, whether it be a board somewhere looking for somebody, of your caliber. I want them to be able to find you. So where can people find you to work with you, whether it's consultation or anything across the
Yeah. I don't have a website, but what I do have is LinkedIn.
Yeah?
So I would say feel free to find me on LinkedIn,
Okay.
Dan Friker, Friker, no C. And then you'll see, a face made for radio. Yeah, reach out to me. And look, we talked about this. I'm a very self-aware individual. And I realized that this Punim was not going to be my moneymaker, that I better get me some book smarts. So that's what I did or tried to do.
I do not agree, but okay. And can be found on LinkedIn. Oh my God, I was not expecting that. So Dan can be found on LinkedIn, Dan Fricker. Dan, please, before we end this conversation, I like to ask for golden nuggets or a golden nuggets to our listening audience. So for anybody listening, whether it's a generational thing or a college student or a young adult starting out life or somebody finding themselves in a position where they have to pivot in their career, what is the one or few things that you like to leave them with?
Here's what I would say. And I think this is applicable to young people, to older workers, is I would strongly urge them to create some type of personal project plan. And what I mean by that, you can call it a career plan. Lock yourself in a room for an hour or a certain amount of time and honestly just think of yourself. I know that sounds so basic and crazy and borderline stupid. Just think of yourself and really kind of say, where do you see yourself in a year, in 3 years, in 5 years? And the reason why, if you can do that for just 1 hour, if you can start envisioning not the precise roadmap of your life, because that won't work, but if you could just get a major destination point, and you can then take that simple document and you can start to create those small habits that can make a big difference in your day-to-day life to get you where you need to be. And you talk about that moment as a teacher. I guess the closest thing that I can tell you working with students is when you get that moment, because sometimes it can be just a moment, where they get you,
Yeah.
they hear you, they see you. And it's like, I'm not telling them to do it for me. I'm like, no, literally, I need you to do it for yourself. Because if you can actually start to see where you want to be and where you want to go in that time frame, now you're having completely different conversations with teachers, with mentors, with friends of what you want to be and what you want to. Basically, what I'm trying to get students to do is think about their potential options because life is better with options. It's when you don't have options that life gets hard.
That was a sermon. I didn't ask you to preach, but you came up here.
Yeah.
Well, okay, cool. Like you, lock yourself in the room, make sure you can unlock it at the end of the day so you don't have a crisis. But give yourself an hour. I don't know what it is, Dan. People are just scared. People are just so scared of the emptiness. Why is that? Why are people scared to spend time with themselves alone with just the void that brings about clarity?
Yeah. In a world where now, again, I'm doing this call from Las Vegas, one of the most stimulating places you can ever be. It's the light, it's the sound, it's the smell. It is fully immersive. And I think, though, that so many other places that we live today. I think you had referenced that you live in New York. That's another very stimulating place. So to get comfortable with the quiet, to get comfortable with just kind of that, letting your mind to kind of just take it down, you get back to that kind of equilibrium and just focus on that simple question of a year from now, what does your next job look like? Or what are you doing in your current job? And then really kind of breaking that down in terms of what kind of additional responsibilities would you like to have or not have? Do you want to manage people? Do you want to go back and get additional certifications? Do you want to maybe change and pivot your career? One of the things that our research has shown is nurses left the nursing industry in droves, both during and shortly after the pandemic for a variety of reasons. But nurses really kind of take a lot of those transferable skills. Some of them went into medical sales. Some of them actually went into research. Some of them went into but that was a conscious decision, maybe coming from a place of borderline negativity and stress environment. But I think if you can recreate that same roadmap, but do it in a time when you're at like a stable condition, because you're right, phone calls, family, whatever, like all those things can kind of alter your stress level. Not always, but typically people don't make great decisions when they're highly stressed. So if you can kind of get to that place where you're kind of trying to bring that down and then just try to focus and set the little timer. And if you can start doing that and you can do it again and again and again, what you're going to find with that 1, 3, 5 year plan. And by the way, I'm sharing advice that a mentor gave me. And what creeps me out is that when I looked at that plan of where I wanted to be a year, 3 years, 10 years in the future, in hindsight, when I looked at it, how close it was to my reality. And it was creating those little small habits that make a big difference. And being old myself, like if I can pass on anything through experience and crystallized intelligence or just perseverance, that is something that I would love to try to impart on kind of that next generation. Like it doesn't have to be like if I had to have a seminar, I would probably call it "Don't do what I did."
Oof.
Like all the scars and mistakes that I've made.
Yeah.
And if I can just get that next generation to make maybe one less mistake to get them where they like to go faster, like that would be success.
Thank you. That is a seminar I would love to attend. And also do not go all the detours, the unnecessary detours. So we all have something to impart. Thank you so much, Dan. It was such a great conversation. And we got talking. I'm grateful you made time to be here. I know you're at a seminar and you're doing the things and meeting the people. So thank you for making time and thank you for having this conversation. It is
Well,
appreciated.
thank you. It was
Thank
a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
It really was. All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Remember, you can find Dan on LinkedIn. Dan Friker, no C, Frikaer, no C. All right. He is on LinkedIn. Find him, squeeze the juices out of his brains. As you can see, he's willing to share. Yeah, he's a great guy, as you can see. All right. Thank you, guys. Take care of yourself. And I hope you got something from this conversation. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to AVP60 podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. It really helps us out. We'd love to hear your thoughts and continue the discussion. So join us on social media or drop us a message. Until next time, keep exploring, stay curious, and keep pushing the boundaries of your world.